Hello, friends. Welcome to the LeggLife Podcast. My name is Adam.
My name is Sherry.
Sherry Beth, what episode is this?
48.
It is episode 48, but more than episode 48, this one kind of is special.
It's the last of the year.
It is the last episode of the year. Our first year ever doing a podcast. Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to talk about today is the podcast. We're going to talk about our highs, our lows, things we've loved, things that maybe we haven't loved, what it's going to look like next year, because we're going to take the month of December off. We're not going to be doing podcasts because we're going to be doing Vlogmas over on our YouTube channel. And, well, when you have to make a video every single day, that's a lot.
It's a lot to have two things on Saturdays.
Completely. And so we said, you know what, let's take the month off from the podcast, give us a little bit of a break, and then you guys get to hear us yammer on here on the podcast back again in January.
Yeah.
So Sherry, you and I had talked about doing a podcast for kind of off and on for a while. Like, it's always one of those things that just we sort of thought of, but then didn't really.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely something that we've sort of thrown around, and we were like, oh, we should totally do this. And we just never really, did.
Yeah, some of you guys will remember our failed attempt at the first podcast, which was called Spilled the Teacups.
We had, what, 2?
I think we had 2 of them. It was our idea was like a Disney gossip and news podcast. And I still, to this day, think that the branding for Spill the Teacups is genius.
Sure. I think we just didn't have enough, ideas, but also cares to keep that up. It was like, ooh, this would be fun. And then we got, literally 2 weeks in, and we were like, we have nothing else to talk
about. And so we're like, okay, we are not
well, dang it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we are not Disney full-time can do that. And it's kind of the same reason that LeggLife, even though most people find us through Disney over on YouTube, it is just about our life. There's Disney elements to it because it's a part of our life.
Right, but Disney isn't all of our life.
We are not Disney vloggers.
Right.
And so we're also not Disney podcasters.
Right.
And so when we were thinking about take 2 of a podcast, we were thinking about different kind of things we could do, different topics, and really we thought, you know what? We love having the freedom over on YouTube to make whatever kind of content is true and real to us at the time. And we thought, wouldn't it be cool to have the same thing be true about the podcast?
Yes, and we also, so that was sort of our thought behind what to name the podcast. Let's just keep it all the same thing, just call it LeggLife. But then also, topic-wise, it sort of, I feel like it's something that you and I have always been good at, is just talking to each other, having conversations.
About a wide range of things.
A wide range of topics, and I think that's honestly what sort of started us on the podcast journey. Even just sort of talking about it was just after we would have this long conversation or something, we were like, that would have been a really good podcast. I would have listened to that podcast.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that we just sort of, we were like, okay, we just need to just get this going, because I feel like we have a lot of these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and so it really the podcast for us was just recording conversations that were already happening in our home.
Right.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And just putting some structure around that and inviting you all into that conversation. Mm-hmm. So Sherry, let's kind of take a look back as far as what this year has been. Because when we started a podcast, there were a lot of unknowns. But the biggest unknowns to me were really twofold. Number one, would we stick with it?
Right.
And then number 2, would anybody listen? Because just because you have people who watch you on YouTube and who may follow you on Instagram does not mean they're going to come over to a podcast.
Right.
Moving people from one platform to another is incredibly, incredibly difficult.
Right.
And you guys have blown us away. Just so you know, this is our 48th episode, as Sherry mentioned. So we have 47 episodes that are out there. Those 47 episodes have been listened to almost 25,000 times.
That's crazy.
An average of over 500 listeners per episode, which is so far beyond the average podcast statistic. It blows us away because we're vloggers, we're YouTubers, we're not podcasters.
Right.
Yet you guys are helping us become that. And so that's been, I don't know, it's been amazing that you guys actually showed up. I think the other amazing thing for me is that you and I only missed one Saturday episode.
Right.
And it wasn't even when you were basically dying.
Right. Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but I think that and it that to me is sort of crazy that like hands down the worst season of our marriage, health wise.
Yep.
We never missed a week, but just randomly in like what was that, September, October, we were just like whoops.
So crazy.
Right.
So crazy. So I want to talk to you guys about like our top episodes. Like what are the episodes that you guys have listened to the most? And there are 5 of them. I want to give you the top 5 episodes. The most listened to episode, Sherry, any guesses?
No.
Enneagram.
Oh,
our
that makes
Enneagram
sense.
episode was the most listened. Now, when you listen to these or you hear these, one thing I do want you to think about is that most of these most listened to ones are like our earliest.
Right.
Now,
they've been out longer.
One of the things that I've had to get used to, because on YouTube, you kind of rate a video's performance through like the first 24 hours, the first 7 days. You know what I mean? Like a video does really well at the beginning and then like really trails off.
Mm-hmm.
But podcasts you measure differently
Right.
because of the way you guys listen. And so podcasts you really look at like the first 30 days, which is crazy to me.
Right. Interesting. So you don't really get like a good number until 30 days after it's posted.
Totally. It's like, so if you look at like how many people listen to your podcast in the first 24 hours, it's like, oh man.
6.
Well, I mean, our podcast, we're very fortunate to have a lot of people that listen. And so like our numbers are still bigger than I thought they would be. But then you look like a month later and it's like, oh, that's where everybody was.
Oh, right.
You know, because some people, you may listen to it. You may listen to a month's worth of podcast in like, you know what I mean, one day, like
right.
on a road
Saturday
trip.
while you're doing your laundry or whatever.
Completely.
Yeah.
And so the analytics are very different. So our most listened to was the Enneagram episode. Number 2, making friends as adults.
Oh, interesting.
That's number 2.
That was a fun one.
That was a fun one. Number 3, I think this was our first episode, New Year's resolutions,
I think it was.
where we talked about kind of our goals for the year.
Mm-hmm.
The number 4 is our Faith in Crisis podcast. We're going to talk a little bit more about that one later.
Uh-huh.
That was the one that we did not basically still during your sickness,
Right.
but kind of
Far
coming
enough
out
removed.
of it.
Yeah.
And then the number 5 was introvert versus extrovert.
Oh.
So kind of a wide range of things.
Yeah.
As far as most listened to things. Other things that you guys may find not interesting at all, but I find interesting. Like 90% of our listeners are from the United States. And we actually have a very female-leaning demographic. Now, we, over on LeggLife, have a largely female demographic. So on YouTube, mostly women watch our channel. And so I assumed that would be the case on the podcast. However, the podcast actually leans even more female.
Oh, interesting.
Probably about 75% of the people who listen, 3/4 of those who listen, are females.
Huh.
Between the ages of 28 and 44.
Okay.
So our number 1 demographic is females 35 to 44, but then like literally right behind it, almost tied, is 28 to 44. So 28 to 44-year-old females make up 3/4 of those who listen to us.
That's interesting.
I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that has to do with like the topics we choose, if, you know, I don't know what it is. So
I don't know.
it's my sweet, sweet voice. Hello, ladies. And so
Back off.
so that's who is listening to LeggLife.
Okay.
And I think that's, I don't know, I always think it's cool to know like who is out there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our yearly recap where things have been. 48 episodes in the first year. That is so far beyond what I expected us to do.
It kind of is, yeah. Especially just considering like the first 5 months of the year were not great.
No, not great at all. So let's start on things that are great.
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about things we loved about the podcast, maybe didn't like as much.
Mm-hmm.
So podcast likes. Sherry, when you think kind of back over the last year, our first year as podcasters, what are the things that you've liked about doing the podcast?
For me, I think that there is a side to my personality that doesn't come out on video.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, a big part of that is just because of my own self-consciousness. Like, there's never a time that the camera is on that I am not self-conscious about how I look.
Sure.
And while, I know we talked about this in a podcast, but like while I am trying to be better about that and just embracing who I am and what I look like and all of that, like it's not it's just like a switch that I can just like turn on and off. And so it's always there. It's always in the back of my mind. And even, you know, talking to people in person, like it's still kind of there, unless I am extremely comfortable with you. And so it's just, but, you know, in the podcast, it's just you and me sitting in our studio.
Totally.
And like Missy walking in and out. And so it's just, it's for me a lot easier just to like be myself and let my weirdness show a little bit more, I think, maybe.
Yeah, I would say, so this has been the biggest thing I've liked about doing the podcast as well. We feel the exact same way about this. Because I feel like when I listen back to the podcasts, I feel like people get the most accurate representation of who I get to see you be when nobody else is around. Like the true Sherry. And I would say even family, even close friends, like you are different, not in a bad way, but just in like that.
There's a mask. There's a bit of a.
I was going to say more of guarded. You know what I mean? More of like guarded than a mask. Because you don't portray something that you're not. You just don't necessarily portray fully who you are.
Right. And I think that goes back to my Enneagram and kind of who I am as a person. Like I have circles of comfort.
Yeah.
And, you know, you are in like this inner circle. And then like the next one out, I'm a little more or a little less open with and out and out and out. And so it's, but yeah, like sitting here, I feel like I can be just me. Because
we don't, like, there might be 500 people out there listening to this, but like they're not in this room.
Right.
And there's no camera.
There's no camera.
There's no visual.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we've...
I can sit here in my comfies and not care.
Yeah. So we've actually, you know, a lot of people have recommended to us to do a video podcast. Like, oh, set up a camera and just record what you guys are doing. The reason I don't want to do that, and I fought that to this point, is that the second we set up a camera, if we didn't change anything else with the podcast, the second we set up a camera and hit that record button, the dynamic would change.
And I don't mean for it to, but
no,
it's just it's just really hard for me to not. Like it's just I'm being watched then.
Yeah, so I love the fact that on the podcast you get to say things that I know you would never say if we were recording, and I love that.
Yeah.
Also, you swear a whole bunch on the podcast.
Sure.
It gives you a great way to get that out of your system. Good job, Sherry.
Right, thanks.
So I think that the way you are just really yourself in the podcast, I love that. That's been my favorite thing, without a doubt, about the podcast.
Good.
Another thing I've really liked, Sherry, is kind of just how easy.
It is really easy. And I think, you know, like we said before, the podcast came out of us having these kinds of conversations anyway, and digging deep into topics and, you know, kind of debating. And I feel like it's just something that we do a lot anyway, and it's something we're good at. And so it really just kind of became like, oh, we'll just hit record, and just record our voices. And so it has been really easy.
And even just like practically the ease of making a podcast, like it's hitting record. I would say of the 48 podcasts now that we have out with this one, honestly, I bet 30 of those podcasts had no edits, not a single word removed, not a single anything. What you heard was literally us hitting record the entire conversation and hitting record at the end and then posting it.
Right.
You know, and that's so different than YouTube, because YouTube, there's so much editing that goes into everything, because the way a clip looks and because of just like so many different things. YouTube is just highly edited, but the podcast is just one natural, normal conversation, and I love that.
A lot of one cuts.
Yeah, and so it's like we can, like we'll sit down and record this, and an hour from now, like the podcast is up and we're pouring an alcoholic beverage in the kitchen. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, we are.
like that's so awesome. Like I just love that.
Yeah.
But also, Sherry, I think easy in a way that you mentioned earlier. You talked about just like comfy clothes.
Comfy clothes. My hair up in a messy bun. I can take off my makeup and not care.
There's no getting ready for a podcast.
Right. I don't have to like, and again, that goes back to me being self-conscious, but like I don't have to look okay or presentable to do a podcast because it's just you and me sitting in our studio downstairs, and it doesn't matter what I look like because you've seen me at my worst and you love me anyway.
Yeah, it's a microphone, not a camera. And
Right.
there's something about a microphone that is so much less intrusive than a camera. And I don't know what that is, but like it's really true.
It really is, yeah.
And so I think that for us, those are the two big, like, our big favorite things have been like Sherry, and then just like how easy it's been. The podcast to me has been the most life-giving, like, creative project we've had this year.
I think so, yeah.
It just feels good. Like I've genuinely loved doing a podcast.
I have too.
But there are things, not everything is perfect.
Sure.
And so let's go into some of the things that maybe we haven't loved as much when it comes to doing a podcast. What are some of your dislikes about the podcast?
Remembering that we have to do a podcast.
Yeah. So hold on one second before you move on. I just want to remind people, we do 4 videos a week.
Sure.
We do, I don't know, we don't have a set number of Instagram, Facebook posts, Instagram lives, but I would say on any given week, we are creating probably with Instagram lives, with YouTube videos, with Instagram posts, we're creating 30 plus pieces of content a week to push out. Some weeks it's much more. Some weeks it might be less if we're not going live or we're not posting, that kind of stuff. And then a podcast. Mm-hmm. And so just realistically, there are some weeks where it's like, oh crap, podcast tomorrow.
Well, and I feel like it's usually like 10:30 p.m. on a Friday. And we're like, crap.
Totally.
We have to have a podcast in 8 hours. But again, with okay, well, what do we want to talk about? Let's just talk about this topic and go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if we're already in our PJs. It doesn't matter if I've already taken off my makeup. Like we can just come down here and hit record. And so
that's nice.
That is nice, but one of the things that I'm always just like, how do we remember that we have this every week? And I don't know.
Well, and I feel like we do good when it comes to thinking about like topics.
Yes, I feel like we have a whole list on our phone. Although we're not.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is what we're going into next is
transitioning into.
This is like the next thing that we don't necessarily like. What I was going to say is that I feel like we do good coming up with ideas for the podcast. Uh-huh. But then practically being like, okay, that's our idea. We're going to have a podcast this Saturday about Thanksgiving side dishes. But then we don't say, okay, so what day are we going to sit down and record that?
Right.
You know, it's like we have the idea, but that we're not good about that next step, which is like actually putting it on the calendar when we're going to make that piece of content.
Right.
We know what we're going to make. We have no clue when we're going to make it.
Yes.
And
then it's Friday at 10:30.
Yeah, that's right. So it's like, all right, well, let's record. But then the next thing that we were going to kind of transition into is around the whole topic thing. Like, what are we going to talk about?
Yes. And I felt like, so when we first kind of started talking about, okay, are we going to do this podcast? Yes or no? Like, what do we want to talk about? We started making a list of topics in our phone that we share. So we have like a shared notes account.
Yep.
So either one of us could update it, and it would update for both of us. And we had this list. We were so proud. We had like 20 items on this list, and we were like, man, this is going to be great. We have 28 things to talk about. Now, keep in mind, this is now our 48th.
Yeah.
So we ran out of those 28 weeks ago.
Yeah.
29 weeks ago, because we missed a week. And so, like, coming up with more has been more difficult than I thought. Because I just feel like we sat down and we were like, okay, so what kind of things do we want to talk about? And we just, like, threw them out. Like, we were just like, go, 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 go. And then we came to the end of that list and we're like, well, crap.
Well, in some ways and this is like any creative project, that there is this percentage of really low-hanging fruit or really great ideas that are easy.
Right.
Right? And so what we did is we knocked out all of the easy ones kind of in this season 1, you know? And so heading into like 2022, thinking about the kind of things we would talk about, I do feel a little bit more stress around that.
A little bit. We do still have some ideas in our notes, but I feel like they're less thought out, I guess. They're just like
they're cookie
vague,
dough, not fully baked.
Right. They're like vague topics. So we're like, oh, we could kind of talk about something like this. And I think that's where I mean, I don't know if we want to transition into what we wanted to do later, but we'll talk about that later. But like, I think that's where you guys are going to come in.
Just I have no clue what Sherry's talking about.
A little bit more.
I'm so confused.
Wanting to get topics from our listeners.
Oh yeah, so that's more. One of the things that, and again, we'll talk about this more, but that's one of the things that we will need help with, because podcast topics, I don't want to say we're running out of ideas, because we still have a lot of ideas, but it's just not as easy as it was.
Right.
The other thing that is so hard with balancing that is figuring out, okay, this is a great idea, but would this be a better video?
Yeah, and we have run into that a couple of times.
Nailed it.
Wow.
Proof that we don't edit our podcast.
Proof we don't edit our podcast. I just can't talk. But yes, we've come up with this really great idea, and then we're like,
actually, that'd be a better video.
I feel like that'd be a better video. I feel like that needs to be visual. And so, yeah, we've removed things from our podcast idea list.
So yeah, figuring out what would be, like, what makes more sense on YouTube, what makes more sense on a podcast.
Yep.
But then, like, is it okay if there's topics that we do both? Like, you know what I mean? Where it's like it's like, wait a second, this is a video. You guys just did this on your podcast. You know, it's like, well, who cares? You know? And so, I don't know, maybe...
Then pick one.
Yeah, maybe in 2022, maybe we'll have stuff that kind of crosses over.
Yeah.
A little bit. But now let's talk a little bit about where we think the podcast... Oh, you have one more thing.
Yes. Sorry, I just had a ding, ding, ding.
Oh, God.
What if...
Oh, no.
We sort of played them together, in that we make a video about something and then say, we're going to dig into this deeper in our podcast.
Well, I would love to do that, because remember, one of the original goals of this podcast was that there were times when we would make videos on YouTube, and it would be like, man, we had like 3 minutes to talk about that on YouTube, but we needed 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Or an hour.
Right, and we just didn't feel like we could make an hour-long video because we would lose people. But we could have an hour-long podcast, because I feel like people listen to podcasts longer than they would watch a video.
Completely. So I definitely see us doing more of that in the future, like tying them together, that if we have something that comes up in a video, like almost like the longer format version of it will be on the podcast.
Right.
So we'll certainly do that. But then, yeah, going to like, okay, so what's next? Where's the podcast going? Mm-hmm. Let's dive a little bit more into what the secret Sherry gave away, Sherry, is that we do want to get you guys more involved in the podcast, especially in the idea creation, because the last podcast we did last week was one of the most fun episodes we've recorded about Thanksgiving sides, and it came from one of you. It came from Jordy.
Yep.
And I just feel like there are things that you guys, like ideas that you have that would be like, oh, that would be so much fun, or oh, what a great idea that is.
Yep.
That we just don't think of.
Right. And so we're going to kind of add that as maybe an end to this podcast. Go over to our LeggLife Podcast YouTube channel and leave a comment about something you would like us to talk about next year. But also, we would like to have more guest hosts.
So, remind me. Mm-hmm. Auburn's the only guest that we had this year, right?
We had Albert, and that was it.
Albert, and that was it. Pretty great guest, though.
Fantastic. She was great.
Spectacular.
And I wish we'd done more.
You know what? That is a real regret that I have, that we didn't record more podcasts with her.
Yep, I agree. So I think that we need to remedy that. But I'd also like to have, Desi on here. I would like to have, I don't know, we've talked about a few other different people. I think that it would be fun to include some more of our friends in this podcast. So
much of LeggLife, it may have started with us, and we may be like the people that, that you guys relate to this channel or connect with. But LeggLife has just become such a community that I love. It's the reason that I love, on YouTube, recommending our friends' channels. It's the reason we got a message just a couple days ago from someone, and it was just such a sweet comment, and she basically was saying that everybody she watches on YouTube, she was having the realization that they're all people that we told her about. And she just started listing. She was like, the Zachmans and the Millers and Auburn, and you know what I mean? Like, she was listening she's like, everybody that I watch on YouTube is because of you. And I love that. Like, I love that we get to do that, and that we get to expose new people to our great friends. And I think that we can do a better job on the podcast of doing that as well. Yep. Nope. We did have Justin Zachman on here. Oh, we did the football one.
We did. Yep.
I tried
Yep.
to block that out because he's a 49ers fan. And so I tried to...
So we had Auburn and Justin.
That is true. Auburn a couple times.
Yep.
Because we had... Okay, that's right. So we had Auburn on here a couple times.
Yep.
We do more episodes with her.
We need to do more episodes with her and yeah, for sure. But then also just, a bunch of other friends. Like, I just feel like we have such great friends.
Who have fun stories.
Who we have great conversations with. And I think that we can include them.
How have we not had Cam and Laura on the podcast?
Right.
It's a huge miss. So I think that this year has been about us figuring out what the hell we're doing. Like, to be quite honest, like, how do you record a podcast? How do you do all of this? Like, how do you, how does this work? And I'm feeling more comfortable with that stuff to the point where I'm now ready, I think, in 2022 to kind of step it up a little bit. So I think that, like Sherry said, more guests, more idea from you guys. I do think that we're going to continue on the exact same schedule. So we're going to keep doing Saturdays for the foreseeable future. Keep doing one a week, I think is the plan. And gosh, I'm trying to think if there's going to be any other changes. You're still going to be able to listen on Apple, still on Spotify. You're still going to be able to listen on YouTube. That was a huge thing that happened this year.
Yes. Thanks to Auburn, actually.
Golly, that was one of the biggest changes. And now, what's really cool is that probably 25 or so % of the listeners that we have that listen to our podcast are doing that over on YouTube.
That's where I listen to them.
Isn't that crazy? Mm-hmm. It's so cool. That's where all you guys interact with us. And I checked. It may change by the time you guys are listening. As of right now, 299 subscribers.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Over on there.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
I love it.
So hopefully we get to 300 soon. I have also liked the podcast. Now we're just going to ramble, okay? Now we're going to enter the ramble section.
Okay.
I have really liked the podcast not having to be anything. And what I mean by that is... our YouTube channel has grown to the point where every month we're getting paid by Google, and it's a significant amount of money. Like, it's not nothing. Mm-hmm. It makes a difference in our life. And I love that, and that's all because of you guys. And thank you so much for helping us have a paycheck every single month. But on the podcast, we haven't pursued monetizing it because there is something about having this creative outlet that just doesn't have to be anything. That's felt really nice.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying we're never going to have, advertisers or we're never going to, monetize this, because maybe someday we will. But for this year, it's been really nice having something that just gets to be what it is.
Yes.
Don't got to worry about brand deals. Don't got to worry about ads. Don't got to worry about anything. We sit here in our comfs and hit record and upload it to the world.
And talk about whatever comes to mind.
Whatever comes to mind.
Yep.
So, friends... There you go. That is our 1 year podcasting recap. Sherry, do you think we're officially podcasters? Right?
I don't know.
25,000.
Yeah. I still feel like we're still just like, wait, how do we do this?
What button does this?
What does this do?
It's true.
Here's what I will say though, as far as, and I think we had this in our notes to bring up, and I don't think we did.
Oh. Boy.
One of the things that I appreciated about the podcast the first half of the year is that I was very sick and could not and did not want to participate in YouTube videos.
Yeah, you don't want people to see you because of how bad it was.
Because of how bad it was. And but I feel like I could still contribute via podcast.
Huh.
And I also felt like it was something that I know that I missed some. I think there were a couple where you had to do them by yourself.
You know what, Sherry? I wish I had gone back and looked before this. I think there was only 1 or 2 that I did by myself. There was one. It's one of my favorite moments. We had this topic we were going to talk about. Like, we knew exactly the podcast we were going to record. Mm-hmm. We were going to come downstairs that evening and do it. And I went upstairs to get Sherry because I had everything set up down here, and she was asleep. And during the health battle, she was sleeping almost none. Almost not at all.
Really, in 15 or 20 minute increments.
And so I went upstairs and she was asleep. And there is no way in hell, I was going to wake you up. I was like, nope, I'm recording this podcast by myself, and I let you sleep. Because, like, sleep was so crucial and just so, like, not happening at that point.
Yeah.
That you needed to sleep and I needed to talk. And that's what happened.
Yeah. And I think that really, there was that one time, but I think that there was one time that you specifically planned to do a podcast.
By myself?
By yourself. But yeah, so I think for me, it was something to get me moving a little bit.
Yeah.
Even though movement was not easy and not great, really. I can get really deep here for a second. It gave me something to look forward to, something to fight for.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I was running out of reasons to fight.
Mm-hmm.
I was running out of energy to fight, and I think it gave me something to do.
Here's
where I felt like I had a purpose.
We actually have a question for you guys, because Sharon and I have been talking about this, and we're not sure. Because you guys know us and our voices really well. Like, you've listened to, in some cases, hundreds of hours of us on YouTube and here on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
When you listened to those episodes during the worst of the fight, could you hear it in her voice? We've been talking about that a lot
We've
lately.
been talking about it, and I keep wanting to go back and listen, and I'm afraid to.
Yeah.
I haven't made it a priority because I'm afraid to. And maybe there wasn't much of a difference, but energy-wise, I know that I had very little left in me.
Yeah.
Especially mid to late February. And so I'm curious to know if you could hear that in my voice.
Yeah, for those of you who know us, know our voice, when you heard Sherry during that time, was it like, oh no? You know what I mean? or did you not notice anything at all?
Right.
Because
I was trying really hard to not.
That's what I was just going to say. One of the things that I really noticed is that the podcast was like the one place, it almost felt like, so this is going to be a nerdy boy reference, okay?
Okay.
So growing up, I loved all these street fighting games, but sometimes your player would be super low on energy or life,
mm-hmm.
but had just enough for one big super punch. And it felt like you saved all of your super punch energy for the podcast each week.
I kind of did.
That you brought, the one place that you brought yourself to every single week was the podcast.
Coming downstairs
yeah.
was a huge deal. Because the stairs were really bad for me.
Mm-hmm.
And talking for an extended period of time was not happening.
Nope, not at all.
There were hours that I would just sit in silence because any movement at all hurt and tore. And so it gave me something to fight for, I guess.
Wow, sorry, our love wasn't enough, Sherry.
No, it was.
No, I'm joking. My gosh. Sorry our love wasn't the super punch of your life.
Wow.
Wow,
right.
Sherry. I actually was pretty proud of my super punch analogy.
I'm very proud of you for that. Yeah.
That was a good one. Thank you.
You're a nerd.
I'm a huge nerd. So, friends, Sherry mentioned it earlier. We want you guys to go over, again, on YouTube, search LeggLife Podcast. Again, hit subscribe. Help us cross that 300 person. I think it'd be dope if one day we had over 1,000. So if you want to, how about this? Even if you don't listen to the LeggLife Podcast on YouTube, would you do me a favor? Do me a solid, as they used to say back in the, I don't know, whenevers. Go over, hit that subscribe button on YouTube on the LeggLife Podcast, and let us know 2 things. Number 1, what are topics, things, anything? Remember, this could be the most, obscure, funny, dumb, meaningless thing ever, or it could be a super serious topic.
Right.
What are things you would love to hear us talk about in 2022?
We're not guaranteeing we will talk about them.
Nope, not even a little bit.
Because we still get to decide what we talk about.
100%.
But you can give us ideas.
And then also, who would you like to hear be a guest?
Yeah.
Who are some voices you would like to hear? And be realistic. Don't be like Elvis. Because if I could get Elvis...
I mean, he's dead, but...
I know. Can you imagine what a get that would be?
Well,
if the LeggLife Podcast is where Elvis came back, I've got to think we would see our subscribers go up.
Oh, sure. Probably.
From 500 listens an episode to at least 550.
At least.
At least. So, friends, thank you guys so much for hanging with us for this entire year as we dipped our toe into podcasting and then kind of jumped fully in. And honestly, I'm really excited to come back in January. Just so you know,
January 1st,
I was going to say, it is the first day of the month, Saturday, yep. January 1st.
Yep.
So as you all are recovering from your hangovers, because I know how you leg lifers party on New Year's Eve. As you're recovering from your wine spritzer hangovers, you can listen to us come back on Saturday, January 1st. Friends, we love you so gosh darn much. Thanks for being a part of our community. Thanks for giving us so much of your time. And we will see you after a 1-month break right here on the LeggLife Podcast. Bye!